Hey there friend, GG here. This video is part 2 of a 5-hour retrospective on 2023 in gaming, what I consider to be the absolute best for the medium. If you'd like to check out the full video in its entirety, you can check out the link in the description, but we decided to cut it up into smaller chunks to make it more accessible for people to jump in and out of. Part 1 is already out, and part 3 will be coming in the next few days. I highly recommend you check out part 1 first, as it contains a lot of information you may be confused without. If someone were to ask me what genre I felt was the most oversaturated, by far my choice would be the shooter, and I bet I'm not alone in that thought process. In an endless sea of battle royales and annual Call of Duty releases, I've long since realized that to capture my attention for a shooter, you've got to do something unique. Be it Overwatch's colorful cast of superhero-esque characters, Splatoon's focus on coverage or unique objectives, Halo's at the time unique setting, or the colorful art style and sense of humor of Team Fortress 2, shooters are at their best when they're not all about realistic graphics and realistic gunplay. We've come a long way from the era of Doom and Quake, and even though the former is still an active series, I've found that the art of the boomer shooter has never been quite perfected after the classics stopped coming out. If only there was a game that took the best of what the subgenre had to offer and remixed it into something new.
Eat fucking bullets, you fuckers! You fucking suck! You fucking suck!
Welcome to Paradise, a spicy cesspool of crime, villainy, and synthwave neon lights. You play as Johnny Turbo, a mute cyberpunk badass with a penchant for flair and raw, unfiltered rampage. Alongside Sam, an AI companion voiced by the original Duke Nukem himself, John St. John, you'll blast your way through those mean streets with an ever-expanding arsenal of weaponry and Johnny's iconic chainsaw leg, to brutalize every single mutant in your way and to take down a rogue AI named Sin with delusions of godly grandeur. Along your way, you'll have to deal with 3 other bounty hunters trying to stop you, each of whom offer a nasty challenge in order to take them down and get back on your blood-fueled murder fest. Look, I could say all I wanted about the gorgeous use of color in each stage, the brilliantness of the character designs, or the god-tier voice work, but truly speaking, I'm not here for the story. Gameplay reigns supreme in Turbo Overkill, and God is it satisfying. Throughout the course of the game, you'll be granted access to over a dozen weapons, ranging from expected tools like shotguns, chain guns, rocket launchers, and magnums, to less expected choices like a pair of Uzis, a plasma rifle, a sniper rifle that lets you teleport to an enemy's location and instantly give them, and even a weapon that lays down a giant laser from space.
I'm gonna fuck the earth! That's right, this is what you get! My super laser piss!
But each weapon also has an alternate fire mode that can be purchased as you play, turning the chain gun into a flamethrower, the sawn-off into a grenade launcher, the Uzis into a singular long-range assault rifle. You've got so many ways to rip and tear and turn the mutant freaks in your way into piles of guts and red mist, and yet they all feel equally satisfying to use, and most of them got equal use out of me during my playthrough. On top of that, though, Johnny himself gains access to a number of equipable perks that grant him different buffs to help deal with the threat, from gaining health every time he gets a kill with his chainsaw leg, to extending the timer on some of his specific timing-based abilities, like his homing rockets and the ability to slow down time. This cigar-smoking cyborg bastard has got it going on with a million ways to approach each situation. Movement is supremely important in this game, and it honestly feels like the whole game has me playing as Scout from TF2, because Johnny is surprisingly fast on his feet, even when carrying a chain gun. Not to mention he can double and later triple and wall jump, and even use his arm as a grappling hook, leading to an immensely difficult to learn but fun to master kit that requires you to not only use your chainsaw leg dash like you're wave dashing in Melee, but also utilize your environment to its fullest. The levels and locales for every fight are extremely well crafted, with cover and space when you need it the most. The game wears its inspirations on its sleeves with pride, for all the good and bad that offers. It's the boomeriest of boomer shooters, and with that comes my least favorite part of the genre. Even in some of the more linear levels, if you aren't paying good attention,
You get lost!
and that can lead to some frustration. Though frankly, I'll take getting lost any day of the week over having to tangle with some of these bosses, because they can be extremely frustrating at times, even on lower difficulties. Maw, the most interesting of the 3 bounty hunters, is a 4-stage gauntlet that you have to survive without kicking the bucket even once. And while his attack patterns aren't super difficult to learn, they hit like a truck, and he has a tendency to make you chase him around the arena in his first phase. And the later game bosses are real bullet sponges, to the point that between their phases they reload most of your ammo and your health to full. On top of that, by the time you get to the boss, you're going to be less mentally there, because good lord, these levels can get long if you don't know what you're doing, and you're wanting to go for the 100% on enemy kills, frequently lasting up to and over 30 minutes a pop. I'd really appreciate them more if they were about half the length, and if the forced firefights weren't quite so long or quite so frequent, because they're the biggest roadblock. I would not want to be a speedrunner for this game. But even then though, the gunplay is so immensely satisfying, with enemy guns painting the walls red, and some varieties just bursting into cash with a satisfying sound when you kill them. The story isn't something I'm hardcore invested in here, though I wouldn't call it bad either, just completely serviceable for a running and gunning hyper-violent adventure. The best parts are the work of the stellar voice cast, and the cutscenes in which Johnny enters a room, sees an enemy, and then executes them in just the most disrespectful and brutal methods possible. The whole game's presentation is just so over the top that you cannot take it seriously, and the dialogue is filled with delightful camp that really endears the characters to you. The music isn't anything to write home about from a banger perspective, but it definitely invokes that mid-1990s feel alongside the graphics, which take heavy inspiration from the genre's defining titles like Doom, Quake, Ultra Kill, and even non-boomer shooters like Half-Life and BioShock. It really feels like a game made in the 90s in all the best ways. It'd make Shadow the Hedgehog blush. If it doesn't hook you faster than you can say, John Romero's about to make you his bitch, I'll eat my hat. So, with all that in mind, how do I rate this? Graphical presentation takes home an 8, with a genius art style blending that invokes and even surpasses some of its inspirations, and the vaporwave aesthetic of the early game makes it a visual treat. Sound design takes an 8. I like the sounds most of your weapons make, and the soundtrack fits well. Though what really gets it here is that voice cast. Absolutely phenomenal work from each of them. Gameplay is a 10. Each gun feels like a dream to control, and combined with the movement mechanics, it makes it an immensely fun game to just vibe in, while you're filling horrible mutants with bullet holes. Level design is where I'm going to knock it down a bit with a 7. I don't think any of them are bad, but the length really does get to me sometimes, and the bosses in the later half of the game can offer some bouts of frustration. Story is a 7. I'd be more invested if the minute-to-minute gameplay wasn't so much fun and gave me more moments to soak it in, but the writing is very solid and the camp really elevates it to being a little more. Replayability is a 7. The game is just that fun, but does offer a decent chunk of collectibles to warrant returning to previous stages to find, offering both secret stages and gameplay modifiers ranging from insta-gibbing most enemies, to moving even faster, to randomizing what kinds of enemies show up, leading to a game very welcoming to both speedrunners and self-imposed challenge enthusiasts. Side content is a little bare, but there is both an endless horde mode and the ability to import and even create your own custom maps in the game, which is very much appreciated and offers creatives a chance to put that to good use. I'll give it a 6. Tallied up, Turbo Overkill earns itself a 53 out of 70.
No, fuck. I like that gun. You knew I'd like that gun. Yes, the Ching. That's one of the nicest guns I've seen in a long time. I can't wait to shoot that fucker.
Hang on, I'm getting a transmission here. Says it's from King Duke.
And remember, if you don't play Turbo Overkill, you like men. Unless, of course, you prefer women. Or don't have a preference in your partner's gender. Or are perhaps asexual. Regardless, the King supports you in your discovery of yourself and your future endeavors. Gaming is for everyone, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Okay, that's all the time I've got. I've got to get back to playing Animal Crossing New Leaf on my Nintendo 3DS. The Slayer wants to visit my town so we can trade fruit, and so he can convince Marshall to move to his town.
Damn, that's pretty based. You're right, the King. Anyway, Turbo, I'm still gonna rip your guts out through your throat.
As a creative, I definitely know the allure of wanting to do something completely new. If you continue down the same path time and time again, only creating variations on a core idea, you'll often find your creations become more and more derivative. And such is true for the humble game developer, and yet they unfortunately must answer to the whims of the higher-ups looking towards the almighty dollar. And so many series tend to become stagnant, which is why shakeups like Mario Wonder are so great. Yet, occasionally, we get a series successfully leaping into different genres, or dipping their toes in. From Yakuza becoming an RPG to Metroid going FPS, a genre shakeup can do wonders for a franchise, given the ability to flourish. And I'm lucky in that one of my favorite worlds in gaming absolutely refuses to let its additional entries stay in the same genre. From an RPG, to a rhythm game, to a hack and slash, and now to a turn-based tactics title, the Phantom Thieves never stick in one genre for too long. I know a lot of people are sick of the Phantom Thieves at this point and are ready to move on to 6 and whatever cast may come of it, and to an extent, I can agree. I'm ready for Persona 6. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I was so entranced by the world and style of Persona 5 that I would like to continue to see the adventures of this lovable cast of characters, even if they are playing support for someone else, and this game proves that they're still a great cast despite the ending of their character arcs. In Persona 5 Tactica, the Phantom Thieves find themselves in a mysterious alternate world not unlike the palaces they faced before, ruled by an evil tyrant. Meeting a mysterious woman named Irina, and in order to find a way to return to their own world, they join the resistance to take down the tyrant and restore freedom to the denizens. Along the way, they also meet a meek man named Toshiro, who's definitely got something going on beneath the surface. Rather than be an RPG, the party must fight through hordes of minions for each ruler they face, in turn and grid-based combat. The key to this game is positioning. Gone are the weaknesses of Persona 5, replaced by all mooks being vulnerable whenever they have no cover to hide behind. Each Phantom Thief comes packing their guns, melee weapons, and their persona, which depending on their elemental affinity, can cause different status ailments that may help to ensure your enemies are in the worst possible position, and that you are in the best one. Through the power of the One More system, faithfully recreated in this environment, you can keep moving across the battlefield so long as you continue to land critical hits on enemies. And by positioning the thieves around the battlefield, they can do an all-out attack on any enemies in the area between the 3 active members of your party. In addition, thanks to a customizable skill tree that you can shift the balance of at any time via refund, you can ensure you always have the best tools for the job. Just make sure you actually take advantage of those tools. And if you can't get enough customization, the Velvet Room is here too, allowing you to use Persona Fusion to create sub-personas that can be applied to any of the Phantom Thieves to give them additional passive buffs and skills. From a technical perspective, the game isn't super impressive. The environments and maps you traverse are pretty generic, and all the maps in one of the worlds you explore share design elements. For what it's worth, that doesn't bother me too much, considering the game was very clearly made on a smaller budget, and cutscenes are few and far between. The more chibi-ish art style does make this more tolerable, and there are a lot of very mimetic faces and art poses which is much appreciated, but the game isn't so much of a visual treat. Yet the music on the other hand continues to be filled with bangers. Lynn and the Atlas sound team always knock this out of the park. I wouldn't say it's as iconic as the soundtrack of 5, Royal, or Strikers, but those vocal tracks definitely are. The voice work, of course, remains stellar, as the Phantom Thieves' English casting are all legends in their own right, and even newcomers Irina and Toshiro, as well as the antagonists they face, all give a standout performance, especially Marie, the first ruler you face. That said, the bosses themselves are a bit of a mixed bag, with really only Marie being a fight I actually enjoyed. This game's strong suit is definitely the minute-to-minute tactical gameplay against hordes as opposed to its boss battles, a problem I tend to have with a lot of tactics games. I will say that I did play the Paint Your Heart DLC for this game, which does feature the other 2 Phantom Thieves, Crow and Violet, alongside Joker, but it did not factor into my ranking here. I'm just talking about the base game. If I did factor in Paint Your Heart, it might actually bump it a few spots, because seeing those characters again, as well as the additional mechanics, add another layer of depth to the combat. If you're going to pick this game up, the second campaign does throw some extra sauce on an already great meal. though I will say the whole experience is something I would personally recommend waiting for a sale for, unless you just really have a Phantom Thief itch you need to scratch now. Definitely make sure you've played the original game of Royal first though. So how do we score this spin-off? Well, starting with replayability, I'd give it a 6. The maps are fun enough to want to try and challenge yourself to finish enemies in the most convenient way possible, or try a different combination of characters, because your character comp can be the difference between an easy fight and a hard one. Sound design is of course a 10, based on the voice acting and music. The sound effects are also memorable, even if most of them are just recycled from the original game. And why shouldn't they be? They worked great there, and it's the same group of characters just using their powers and weapons in a different context. Graphical presentation is a 6. While I can definitely say I like the more simplistic, chibi art style for these characters, the repeated environmental designs do drag the game down a bit. The animations are nice, but aren't anything extraordinary. There's a healthy amount of side content between the optional missions and trying to complete the Persona Compendium, so I'll give that a 6. Level design is nearly flawless, and each stage can be beaten by taking your time to plan out the best move, though there were a number of stages I personally found annoying, especially during specific side missions. I'll give it an 8. Gameplay is taking home a 9, the mechanics brought over from Persona are just as potent and fun to utilize here, and it makes you feel like a genius as you're stringing together combos of attacks, building up to a grand finale with an all-out attack. Lastly, the story. The writing is very clever even between the Phantom Thieves, their banter is still very fun. But make no mistake, this is Arina and Toshiro's story, and for what it's worth, I really liked it. It had some twists and emotional moments I really dig, and the characterization of these two I really enjoyed. It will net itself a rock-solid 8. Adding all this up, it earns 53 out of a possible 70. Despite my love for these characters though, I do think this may be their final game to themselves, and while that does make me sad, it is a worthy part of their story, even if it does conveniently slot into a portion of the narrative so they can write it off as non-canon if they want to. I hope they don't. Farewell, Phantom Thieves. You really stole my heart once again.
You won't escape!
Fastest shots have landed! Impressive!
That sounds good. Wipe them out!
What to do here?
Perfectly ready. Now, time to strike! It was a close call. We endured once again.
While it is definitely a cliche at this point, I don't think there's a formula as tried and true as rescuing the damsel in distress. Be it the classic Disney princess, the effort to save and de-dogify Dana in Ghostbusters, Peter saving MJ or Gwen from the clutches of a member of his rogues gallery, or even some less literal damsels like Tiny Tim, the person at the end of the journey has been the hero's motivation for as long as fiction has existed. I'm sure you could find hieroglyphs telling this classic story, and there's a reason it's persisted up till the Princess Peaches and Zeldas of today. And yet, what if we were to flip it on its head? What if instead of saving her, you needed to slay her? You're on a path in the woods. If you haven't played Slay the Princess yet and want to do so, I highly recommend skipping to the timestamp on screen. I think that it should really tell you all you need to know that I've only played 3 hours of this game and only gotten 2 endings, and yet it still ranks this high. How incredible of a game this is. I genuinely do not know where to start praising, but I guess I'll begin with the obvious. This game is gorgeous. Every single frame of this game is hand-drawn. And that commitment to the aesthetic led to one of the most visually pleasing games I've ever had the pleasure to look at. With only 4 colors, black, white, gray, and red, the game is still able to tell a narrative more gripping than just about any other. The story is an absolutely wild ride. Every choice you make has an effect on what you will see, who it is you'll meet on the other side of the cabin's wall. You're told that the princess must die, that she's dangerous. Whether you choose to question the narrator, to do as you're told, to pick up a weapon or leave it be, or even to nope out entirely and leave, has an effect. I cannot spoil this story for you. And the devs agree with me. This is an experience you must go into as blind as possible if you intend to play it. As Markiplier began his playthrough, they even said that if you want to play it, to watch Mark do it later, and that if you can't afford the game, to pirate it. Because it's not about the money, it's about the message. This is a game about many things: perception, love, death and finality, choice, most importantly, change. What it means to be a human. No, seriously, skip to the previously mentioned timestamp because I'm going to explain the route I ended up on my first playthrough of the loop and what I took away from it. I took the knife on the first loop and attempted to slay. I then moved on to the tower. I pledged loyalty to her. On the next loop, I slayed her, but checked her body and went down the route of the razor. Feeling guilty on seeing what she became, I resolved to end the next loop peacefully and found myself at the damsel. It felt hollow, so I chose to just leave her be and ended up meeting the stranger. Now knowing that I couldn't just avoid the inevitable, I took the knife with the intent to free, meeting the prisoner at the end of my time and bringing her outside with me as I left. I don't know what it says about me, but none of these outcomes made me happy. Each one ended with someone hurt or hollow. And that's really it, isn't it? The choices you make don't just affect you. A single choice can alter your perception of what kind of person someone is, and who they are to you. Choice is a dangerous, yet wonderful thing. It's scary, but you must keep pushing forward. The princess died by her own hand at some points, by mine in others, killed me in others, and it made me question what death truly is. It's a fear I've dealt with for my entire life, the fear of the unknown on the other side. But truthfully, this game put me a bit at peace with my own mortality in a weird way. I don't really know how to explain why. It made me want to continue my goal, to be the best person I can be throughout my life. And all that's without even mentioning the fractured voices of the player character. The music in this game is beautiful and often haunting, but it doesn't hold a candle to the voice work. With only 2 voice actors, this entire world, every character is brought to life. That's the kind of talent I want to strive towards. It's incredible how different our hero and our princess can sound depending on your choices. So while it may be a bit presumptuous to score after only 3 hours of gameplay, I assure you I intend to experience many more, after updating to the pristine cut when it comes out. Story is a 10 for all the branching paths and changes and the fact that every choice matters. Graphics take a 10 as well. The hand-drawn aesthetic and ability to tell such a compelling story with only 4 colors is a marvel and shows mastery over the craft. Sound design is getting an 8, the music is near perfect with each route, and the sound effects are guttural and feel real, especially in the more horrific routes. It's haunting. Replayability is a 10. I actively want to go back and see every single route, though maybe not every single choice. Side content isn't really a thing in this game, because there's not much to the game beyond its replayability to go visit other routes. And it's at this point why I mentioned the fact that scores don't really affect placement on the list. This game has 3 categories where it earns a score of None Available, or NA. Side content is the first, but there's also level design, which isn't a thing since every variant of the 4 rooms of the game has a functionally identical purpose. Likewise, gameplay is simply selecting choices from a menu and seeing how it affects the story. Such is the nature of the visual novel. So out of a possible 70, Slay the Princess scores a 38, though you could also argue that it's actually 38 out of a possible 40. Regardless of how you perceive it, I highly recommend this game. It's something weirdly beautiful that I can't describe with just words.
Look, I could barely explain the nutty adventure I just went on, so I'm not going to. I don't want to talk about it. I see the devil.
By the way, one of the princess variants is basically just Goku and wants to fight you. Take from that what you will. By far one of the genres I found myself invested in recent years is the hack and slash genre. With titles like Devil May Cry, Nier Automata, and God of War, fans of this style of game have no shortage of awesome, heart-pumping titles to play. Of course, the king, or should I say queen of the genre for me personally, has been the rip-roaring, titillating, jazzy adventures of the Umbra Witch, Bayonetta. I've been a fan of all 3 of her main series games since the first time I played them. I'm invested in the lore, I love the stylish movement and fast-paced action, and yet, just like I said with Tactica, innovation was something the series needed in order to continue on, and innovate it did. Moving into a different genre is a test for a great series. Can they adapt to keep it fresh? Or should they keep to their own lane, slowly moving towards some stagnation as the developers run out of ideas? Being teased through an Easter egg in Bayonetta 3 and revealed at the 2022 Game Awards, the next entry in the series flips the script on everything you thought you knew about this world, its characters, even the target demographic. Alright, first things first. If you're a Bayo fan and you haven't played this, get on it, because you're sleeping on something special. One of the most interesting parts of this franchise is the lore, and despite being alongside her for 3 adventures prior to this, we didn't actually know that much about the backstory of our protagonist. Taking our heroine and bringing her down to the level of a helpless child is the exact opposite of the power fantasy of the main titles, and yet it works so well. In this tale, lovingly presented through beautiful cutscenes with a watercolor children's book aesthetic, we take on the role of Cereza, long before she became the seductive badass we come to know later, as she enters a mysterious forest called Avalon in search of a way to help free her mother from her lifelong sentence for loving a Lumen Sage and creating a child between the 2 clans, something that should have been celebrated. Cereza never asked to be a social pariah, and the pain she suffers really makes me feel for her. Despite warnings from her mentor not to enter the forest, she is called in by a mysterious boy who promises to help her, and is almost immediately set upon by fairies, the mischievous monsters who inhabit this cursed land, until she unknowingly summons forth a demon, just born, into her beloved doll, Cheshire. The doll protects her and insists on being sent back to Inferno, but her powers are not yet fully formed, so the 2 of them have to begrudgingly work together in order to make it out of the forest so Cereza can send Cheshire home. The way this game plays is genius. While I find it most similar to a top-down classic 2D Zelda title, the gimmick is that you actually need to control both characters in tandem, which may be a bit awkward at first, but soon becomes second nature. Cereza is controlled with the left side of the controller, and Cheshire with the right. The former is for solving puzzles and main exploration, while the latter is fit for combat encounters and must protect the frightened young girl. If Cheshire is defeated in battle, he will revert to his plush form and will need to be picked up by Cereza to regain energy, adorably called Hug Mode. As you collect more items throughout the game, both of them will gain new abilities. Cereza will become more useful in combat, being able to support Cheshire with abilities like holding enemies in place, and Cheshire will be able to take on different foes in more convenient and creative ways as he gains more elemental abilities. Mastering the aspects of both is the key to success, though there will be times when they may be separated and you need to solve puzzles or environmental challenges to reunite them. For example, while Cheshire can climb certain cliffs, Cereza cannot. On the other hand, she can go through patches of rosemary, which repel demons, so Cheshire has to find a way around. The push and pull makes neither feel whole without the other. I think easily the strongest aspect of this game outside of the well-designed puzzles and environment is easily the graphical presentation. This is bar none my favorite looking game on Switch. I mentioned it before, but the storybook aesthetic does wonders for it, as this game is a lot more vibrant than other titles in the series. It's also very cool that they managed to make a game set in this world that anyone can enjoy. The pastel colors combined with the orchestral score, the genuinely fun level design which takes advantage of its magical forest design very well, and the absolutely stellar voice acting, specifically from the narrator and from Cereza's voice actress herself, bring a stellar performance to this tale. The game definitely feels like a more modern 2D Zelda, but with the shrines of the most recent outings. There are frequently many small optional dungeons, though some are required, called Tirnanog, I'm sorry for those who speak Celtic in case I butchered that, which offer bite-sized puzzle and combat challenges for rewards, such as items to increase health for your characters, or to purchase new skills from the skill tree, of which very few are actually required, but are definitely helpful. Despite being a notorious puzzle hater, I actually found these one of the best parts of the game, as they never felt too obvious, but also never had me scratching my head for too long. I am not someone who enjoys wasting a lot of time, so I appreciate this approach to puzzles in my story-based adventure game. I do want to take a bit of a moment to talk about fan service. No, not that kind, that's for the other games in this franchise. But as a longtime fan of said franchise, I really appreciated the nods and references to the lore. It was great to see more of Jean and Cerese's friendship, expanding on the confusing appearances of the pixie race in Bayo 3, and I definitely may have sort of squealed in excitement when fighting a certain boss, and heard a song that combined Bayonetta's two themes, Mysterious Destiny and Tomorrow Is Mine, together as I was kicking its ass. It's examples of these that keep longtime fans happy while not being super in your face about how much you remember that thing? A pitfall many spin-offs tend to fall into. So with all that in mind, let's score it. The graphics are netting a rock solid 10. I meant it when I said this is my favorite looking game on the console. I can't get enough of this, and I kinda want more games in this side series to see more of this gorgeous world. The story is a 9, while it's not super deep, there were a few twists I genuinely did not see coming, and overall it was just a very heartwarming story of friendship, as sappy as that is. It hit me in the feels towards the end. The sound design is getting an 8. The music was nice, if not amazingly memorable, but a few select tracks are really wonderful, and if nothing else, the music was atmospheric and perfect for the areas of the game that it played in. Highlights to the lake's music specifically, I really loved that one. The main theme of the first area is also haunting but whimsical, and even has some beautiful lyrics sung in Irish. The gameplay is getting an 8.5. While it's not as satisfying as Bayo's other outings, it doesn't need to be in this style of game, and the puzzle that every battle becomes is a nice challenge. Level design is also an 8.5, as I will admit I did get lost a few times due to confusing layouts of certain areas, such as the windy treetops, but the stunning set pieces and stellar puzzles definitely kept me having fun and not frustrated. The Pixie amusement park was a particular highlight. Side content isn't super fleshed out, but there are a decent chunk of collectibles if you choose to go looking for them. I definitely want to go back in and rescue all the cute wisps at some point. I'll give it a 5. Replayability may be the hardest score to judge, because I definitely think it's worth going through again, but due to the story exploration being the primary focus, it does keep it rather linear unless you go out of your way. It's worth going back in and exploring though, and I wouldn't mind revisiting the puzzles and battles again, but you're not scored or anything, so I think I'll give this a 5 as well. All that put together, Bayonetta Origins grabs a 54 out of 70. You know, I'll admit, I never was super into the 2D Zelda titles when I was younger, but this really has me interested in going back and finishing the ones I never finished, or perhaps revisiting ones I haven't touched before. No wonder Bayo's been part of the Nintendo family for a decade at this point. They knew there was something special here, and they wanted to make sure it didn't go to waste. Being that my first exposure to fighting games was from platform fighters, it took a long time for me to step out of my comfort zone into the more traditional space. My first foray was Marvel, and that scared me from trying other ones due to the complexity, but when I managed to get Street Fighter V and Tekken 7 for only about $30 for both of them and all their DLC, I dipped my toes into it. But it wasn't until a friend got into this game and let me play with them that it finally all started to click into place for me. But when it did, I immediately picked it up for myself, and I've been a little bit addicted ever since. So, one of my biggest issues I've always had with traditional fighters, and especially Street Fighter, is the speed and mobility. Coming from Smash and other platform fighters, where mobility is key, I've always felt that outside of a few exceptions like Marvel, that the more patient footsies-based gameplay was a lot more boring in addition to its complexity. But Street Fighter VI managed to change my opinion on that, all with the use of its newest mechanic, the drive gauge. The versatility this little meter offers changes up the style of the game in many different ways. You can use it for enhanced special moves, perform a reversal attack, for parrying attacks, or to cancel your animation into a dash forward towards your foe while they're in hit stun from an attack, extending your combo. While I know it's a bit more controversial of a mechanic to veterans, I appreciate the fact that some of the most powerful mechanics are tied to a resource rather than being able to be spammed if you just have good timing. But even if you run out of meter and enter burnout, you aren't completely defenseless. It offers a risk to balance out all the sweet rewards you can do to customize your combos, courtesy of the drive gauge. Of course, outside of the gauge, attacks are still very well animated and have a nice crunch to them when you hit. But any fighting game is more defined by its roster, so how does Street Fighter VI stack up? I think it does an alright job. The base lineup, I will admit, is a bit bland when it comes to returning characters, but those are balanced out by the new faces. Starting with the old characters, you have the original 8 World Warriors from Street Fighter II, plus Cammy and DJ from New Challengers, and Jury from 4. I understand why, these are the tried and true characters, and also DJ, but for being set after 3, why are there no reps from that game in here? And please don't take that previous comment as a jab at DJ, I love his new design and personality, but did we really need Honda and Dhalsim to come back? I don't hate them or anything, but they just feel a bit more expendable to me than the others. I'd trade those two out for Dudley and Ibuki. Jury's always nice to see, of course, but she's the newest fan favorite, of course she'll be here. The new additions, though? I think almost all of them are bangers. Lily's a fun callback to T-Hawk without needing to be another vet and be so stereotypical. Marissa is a big tough girl with a lot of impact to her attacks that gives an alternative to Zangief for new people. Plus, she's got a gladiatorial aesthetic which is neat. Luke may be a little vanilla for my taste from a design perspective, but Alex Lee puts in such a good performance as him that I can't help but like the guy. Kimberly is a badass urban ninja who uses spray paint bombs and can teleport in clouds of the stuff like a Mortal Kombat character, and it leads to some dope strategies. Jamie's got a sick fighting style that mixes drunken fist style martial arts and breakdancing together, which exudes true Chad energy and unending swagger. The only ones I'm not a huge fan of are Manon and JP. The former's grab range is deceptive, and all of her bread and butter combos lead into command grabs that take a beefy chunk of your health at level 1, and for some reason, she's the only character who gets to keep her special resource through rounds. Jury doesn't get to keep Fuha stocks, Jamie doesn't get to keep his drink level, so why does Manon get special treatment? As for JP, I actually don't have a problem with most of the design, it's just that all his tools do too much. He's got traps, he's got projectile command grabs, and he's got a counter that works on throws. You know, the thing that's supposed to beat out counters? It's like someone plopped a Guilty Gear or MVC zoner in the more methodical, slower-paced world of Street Fighter combat. I think he needs a massive nerf to some of his kit to put him on par with the rest, or at least make him less frustrating to fight against. The aesthetic of the game is something I'm not 100% sold on, admittedly. While I like the UI design, and I'm especially a fan of the colored paint splotches that appear when drive impacts are used, I do think Street Fighter excels when its characters are more anime-esque. The more realistic aesthetic does clash a bit with the green jungle man, Luke's girthy forearms, and when people are jumping around and throwing fireballs from their hands. I wouldn't say it necessarily looks bad, just a bit distracting at times. The stages, on the other hand, look really nice. While I wouldn't say they're as iconic as the 16-bit classics, there are some real winners that do fit this aesthetic well, most notably King Street, Colosseo, Bathurst Beach, a real highlight with the gorgeous sunset, and Manon stage, which I will try not to say because I don't want to butcher the French language. Next, I'd like to cover the side content of the game, and for what it's worth, there is actually a lot more than your average fighting game. Quality is subjective, but in addition to your normal arcade mode, there's also a reasonably sized campaign to which you can create your own character and uncover a plot going on during the lead up to a tournament in Metro City of Final Fight fame, as well as meet and learn the moves from all the fighters in the game, including being able to combine their special moves together onto your OC. Naturally, because I wanted to be funny, I made my character Hank Hill, which undermines the stakes of the story. Not that there were huge ones anyway. I thought it was a fun mode being able to wander around, fight mooks, and such, though it's a bit too long in my opinion. You can also take your avatar into the battle hub and fight other people's avatars as well. It's nifty, though not something I do frequently. One last thing I want to touch on before the score is the accessibility options. Street Fighter VI introduces a second control style for beginners called Modern Style. I'm a bit conflicted on this. As while it's a good tool for teaching fundamentals and the use of special moves, it's very limiting and can teach bad habits to some players due to it having automatic combos. I would suggest that new players start with this, then switch over to classic controls to unlock your fighter's true potential. I'd also like to see them put modern and classic players into different online queues, or make that an option you can enable, because playing against modern players doesn't help me learn the matchup either, because it's just fighting and learning to avoid the same handful of moves and the same bread and butter combos. That said, if you play modern Zangief, there's a special layer of hell just for you. So let's score this brilliant fighter. Story is a 5, it does its job, it isn't something I'm really here for. You get better lore snippets from each character's arcade ladder. Graphics are a 7, I do think the more animated attack animations are at odds with the attempt to make characters look more realistic, and I just think it ends up a bit of a mess. Sound design takes home a 7.5, the impact noises of attacks are as strong as ever, but the music really took a hit. Very few of the new themes are as iconic or catchy as the character's classic theme music. There's really only 5 character themes I would say I actually like, being Juri's, Ken's, Kimberly's, and the clear undisputed king and only certified bop, Jamie's, which I've been playing during this segment. Replayability is a 10. It's hard for me to get tired of matches in a fun fighting game, and I'm very rarely not in the mode for a match or two. Side content grabs an 8, as there's more than your average fighter that is fun in short bursts, though I would like a bit more. Level design is a 9, the stages all look really nice and I have no complaints there, and exploring Metro City's nooks and crannies can be lots of fun. Gameplay nets a 9, it's really just a great foundation. The only reason I have it lower than 10 is because I think Manon and JP need some balancing. We're already in Season 2 of the DLC, and I think they're still both oppressive. With that said, Street Fighter 6 earns a solid 55.5 out of 70. A few other quick things I wanted to mention but didn't have time for. Can we not put battle passes in fighting games? The core game is so good it makes up for it, but does anyone actually use this, considering most of its costumes for your avatar or classic Capcom games you can buy or emulate easily elsewhere? And as for the characters I play, Juri and Cammy are my mains, though I dabble with Kimberly and Jamie, and I'm also considering picking up Ken since I'm not half bad with him. But I will definitely be adding Terry into my lineup because I am excited that we're finally officially crossing over with some non-Capcom properties. I don't want them to take up every slot, of course, but with Terry in mind, it does give me hope that maybe we could get my girl Reina from Tekken popping up, so we can cross over with my other girl, Juri.
Final round. Fight!
That ain't the plan. Get ready! Come on. It's time to train. Too slow! It's not good enough.
Jamie wins!
The eternal vastness of the wide-open sea is breathtaking. What wonders hide beneath the blue-green waves still undiscovered? A treasure trove of the beautiful, the weird, the dangerous. From massive formations of coral that stretch the limits of the colors we can perceive, to the RGB-like light refractions of some jellyfish, to the breathtaking size of the blue whale, marine biology is a fascinating world, especially in the area of the unknown, down in the deepest depths of the sea where no light can reach. What wonders and horrors could lie there? Our only clues are those that we've seen. The ocean is such an amazing ecosystem of life, and yet so few games manage to capture all that it has to offer, and oftentimes only choose one side of the spectrum, the beauty or the horror, to display. But despite my reservations against the genre of the title itself, one game I kept hearing nothing but praise about managed to balance all the wonders of the Great Blue to its fullest potential, and turned out to be one of the best games I've ever had to play. even if it isn't an indie game, Jeff.
That's it. I'm going fishing.
Dave the Diver was an incredibly surreal experience. The narrative isn't complex. You play as a guy named Dave, who sort of gets tricked by a buddy into working at a mutual friend's struggling sushi restaurant, set up right next to a mysterious coastline where fish from every sea gather, and is constantly shifting terrain called the Blue Hole, though I personally call it the All Blue.
The One Piece! The One Piece is real!
In all seriousness, there is a bit more to it, but the story isn't what I'm here for. I'll admit, I'm not the world's biggest fan of roguelites. The only one I've really cared for is Hades, and even then, I do have my fair share of issues with that game. But one thing that I do love is fishing. I haven't gone in a long time, but I used to fish with my mom's partner when I was younger, and it's a hobby I'd like to pick up again. There's something about it that's just super relaxing and helps melt the stress away. And that feeling is something that this game excels in replicating. The core gameplay loop is simple, yet all in all, brilliant. You dive twice a day, using your harpoon gun and later additional tools to catch marine life for the sushi restaurant, and the Blue Hole is filled with different varieties of fish that each fetch a different price when made into sushi. Did I mention I also happen to love sushi? I crave it every time I play this game, I swear. Let that be a warning to those with a palate refined enough to appreciate some of the finer things in life. When night rolls around, you set up a menu from ingredients you have access to, then open the restaurant. Your shift plays out as a series of minigames, serving drinks, cleaning the counter after customers leave, refilling the wasabi supply, and of course, running back to the chef to deliver orders. You'll eventually unlock the ability to hire staff to serve more and more customers. All in all, it's a very satisfying loop, but the game is filled with things that break up the action to ensure it never gets boring. Between major plot beats, there will be parties expecting specific types of food, as well as VIP guests in the same vein, where you'll need to ensure you have the proper ingredients on hand, points where you'll collect packages that got sunk in the sea, a classic Cooking Mama-esque game show where you play as the chef in order to prepare a tasty dish, an entire miniature farming sim to collect and harvest veggies, rice, and eggs, a Tamagotchi-esque game on your in-game phone, and a side-scrolling runner as well, photo challenges, and an above-water stealth section that's an homage to Metal Gear Solid. It never gets boring, and there's so much to do, in addition to the already fun diving and management aspects. And to top it all off, there's even some boss fights with oversized sea creatures where you'll get to exercise your right to bear arms for self-defense against such beasts as a giant squid, a massive hermit crab using an old truck as its shell, and even a dinosaur. Being a roguelite, as you progress, you'll gain access to better equipment to survive longer and longer during dives, craft better weapons to take with you when you dive, and pick up goodies during dives to prolong them, including better melee weapons, more ammo for your guns, single-use or utility items, and even cooking ingredients to take up to the surface to amplify and unlock more dishes. You may even find cat food to feed to the chef's pet kitty Momo. Feed him every day for a surprise. All of that, and I haven't even mentioned the game's presentation. It's a charming mix between simplistic 3D backgrounds and level geometry and delightful pixel art. It's an extremely effective juxtaposition that manages to stand out as something special, and the color palettes of the game are really pleasing to the eye. Combine this with the atmospheric music during dives, and you have one incredible presentation that leads to an almost addictive, just one more run quality that every roguelite wants to have. It even throws in some interesting lore about unique marine life, and the characters you'll meet along the way are, for the most part, relatively charming and fun to interact with. I hired a cute ninja girl to work at my sushi bar. One thing I will knock it for before we set up our score, the writing occasionally takes some pot shots about Dave's weight, but for what it's worth, Dave takes it in stride like a champ. But whether it's the fault of the original writing team or the translation team, I couldn't tell you. But come on guys, it's 2024. There's no reason to be an ass about somebody's weight. It's one thing to be concerned for a friend, it's another to laugh and say, haha Tubby, are you on meal 25 of the day already? Ignoring the ignorant attempts at comedy though, the cast is all pretty lovable and memorable, and most of the other comedy in the game tends to land. Alright, time to score. Story net's a 7, it's perfectly fine for what it is, and gets a boost due to the interesting lore and great characters. Gameplay is a perfect 10, I really can just sit for hours and do this gameplay loop. Maybe it's just because the ocean is so captivating for me, but it is a blast. Graphic presentation is a 9. While the pixel art isn't as drop-dead gorgeous as Sea of Stars, it doesn't need to be, and it looks lovely on its own. Sound design is a 9, between the satisfying sound effects for every action, be it shooting at a shark, pouring tea, or bashing a no-good golfin' poacher with a baseball bat, and the beautiful music that evokes the feeling of the sea perfectly. I think it's near perfect. Replayability is a 10. I mean, it's a roguelite. That's kind of the most important aspect to nail, and that loop is satisfying even after the credits roll. Level design is a 6. While it's not bad by any means, I do wish there was a tad more consistency or a little more randomness. While those are at odds with each other, I'm seeing a lot of the same layouts frequently, and I'd appreciate either something to spice it up a bit, or to guarantee I'll find specific landmarks in the exact same spot every time. Side content is a solid 8. You don't have to engage with a lot of it, but it does provide so much you can do that if you want to go for 100% completion, you will have a lot of variety to look forward to. Dave the Diver proudly pulls in a big one at 59 out of 70. Full disclosure, I did play the DLC for this one, because for one, both packs are free, though the second one is on a time limit for people who want it. The license for it expires on November 23, 2024. That's because this game got not one, but 2 crossover DLCs. The first with fellow 2023 fishing game Dredge, introducing a taste of that game's underwater eldritch horror into this game, and the latter with Godzilla of all things, complete with a kaiju boss battle. Both DLC's missions integrate so naturally within the game's story that if I hadn't had to install them manually, I wouldn't have even known. That said, the DLC didn't have any effect on my opinion on the list. The base game is just as worthy of your time, and the DLC just adds a little something new to an already amazing title. By far the genre I'm always most hesitant to step my toes into is real-time strategy. Sure, I've played some bangers, the gold standard of which is, in my opinion, Age of Empires 2, but I'll come right out and say it, my mental capacity to try and handle everything at once tends to quickly reach its limit in this kind of game. A kind of game where sitting down and just pausing is not usually an option, hence why I prefer to play with friends by my side. I just don't have the APM for it, much less considering rebinding controls is a nightmare. I would say that, generally speaking, I'm not quite cut out for the PvP gameplay, but PvE is definitely a different story. I'd like to tackle the campaigns of these games someday, but for now, I think there's a series that takes the formula and perfects it, a series that for far too long I've ignored, which is kind of ironic considering I mained the main character of this game all the way back in Smash Bros. Brawl. I definitely put a decent chunk of time into Pikmin 2 when I was but a wee little homunculus, but I can safely say that I never quite got the full appeal of it. It was fun, but to my tiny child brain it was just busy work and tedium with cute little critters after a while. I have wanted to give it a try again in modern years, but I never actually put in the effort to do so. While I do own every title in the series, I hadn't touched it in at least 6 years since I bought Pikmin 3 on the Wii U.
Hey y'all, Scott here.
So I was definitely hesitant to give this one a try, but yet after just the first play session, I had already been ensnared by this game's endless charm. The key to the world of Pikmin is the ability to master Dandori, the art of time management and planning. Each area in Pikmin 4 is filled with enemies, treasure, and tools to help you create Pikmin, and you're going to need them, in every variety. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock different types of Pikmin. Red are good generalist options and are immune to fire, yellow fly farther and dig faster and are immune to electrical damage, blue ones can walk underwater, white are immune to poison and are the fastest to move, purple deal the most damage and can carry the strength of 10 others but are really slow, pink can fly, rock can break through crystal and withstand getting trampled, and the newly added ice Pikmin can freeze water surfaces if enough are sitting in it, as well as freeze the enemies in it solid. Also introduced here are the Glow Pikmin, which I'll cover a bit later. Pikmin 4 has 3 core aspects of its gameplay, which all add up to something greater. By managing your Pikmin's tasks in the overworld to clear out hazards and enemies, you'll have an easier time transporting cargo, which is your main goal. You play as an officer of the Rescue Corps, and your mission is to rescue castaways lost on the planet. You'll also need to collect treasure, as a mysterious energy resonating from it is the fuel for your ship to reach new areas. But castaways won't be found on the surface. They're found in caverns, which act as bite-sized dungeon areas filled with enemies and more treasure, introducing a dungeon crawling aspect to the game. You can only bring in so many Pikmin, so you have to get good at utilizing them in combat, which is technically optional in the overworld. At the very minimum, you'll need them to take on the most dangerous wildlife, the boss enemies, who are usually guarding a castaway and a valuable treasure. But many of these castaways are infected with a mysterious illness that causes them to grow leaves, of which the Cord's doctor has made a cure for. However, it can only be made with a special sap that only appears in specific areas at night, the colonies of the Glow Pikmin, mixing up your normal Dandori and turning into a tower defense game, as every enemy in the stage will be gunning for the Glow Pikmin colonies. Thankfully, the Glow Pikmin are basically little ghosts, so they are impervious to all elemental damage types, they move fast, and they fly to your location when created, and can create a swarm that stuns enemies temporarily. These sections can get pretty intense, which helps give the game a bit more edge to it that I really like. I'm glad that it isn't the whole game, but they're a nice type of gameplay to break it up from time to time, just like the caves. And let's talk for a second about the environments we're exploring and how freaking gorgeous they are. I said earlier that I think Bayonetta Origins may be the prettiest game on the Switch, but I think this definitely takes the silver, because it has this really soft stylistic middle ground between cartoony and surreal with enemy designs, but the environments feel very real, somehow managing to not clash with each other and keep it visually appealing. Honestly, as an evolution of the style that 1 and 2 wanted to have on the GameCube, without pushing too far into realism, which I felt was a weird choice for the series in 3. Visual design is key to the charm of the creatures in this world, and I think they nailed it perfectly this time, with both creatures old and new. The environments also work hand in hand with the music, which once again isn't necessarily full of bangers, but rather very atmospheric pieces that are calming to the day-to-day gameplay. Until you start a boss fight, in which case you immediately go into fight mode. Some highlights of the soundtrack include the groovy Longlegs boss theme, and especially the final boss theme, where they just said, screw it, let's just make our own version of Versus Ridley, complete with intensive percussion and metal guitars. It's fucking awesome. The thing that I really think made Pikmin 4 grab me so much is honestly your companion Ochi. This little scrunkly doggo will be with you throughout your playthrough, and he makes everything in this game just click. He's like a hybrid between a captain and a squad of Pikmin. He can both command his own squad, but also attack enemies and transport treasure, so you can set him off aside doing his own tasks, or switch to him as needed to manage multiple tasks at once with part of your squad. Not to mention, he has a number of useful abilities, including the ability to ride on him for faster movement speed, and some mild jumping capabilities for small ledges, and being able to swim so that you can transport your non-blue Pikmin over water. Combine this with the ability to build structures out of raw material you find, like climbable walls and bridges, and navigation has never been more of a breeze in this series, which was one of my big hang-ups in earlier titles. There's also a wealth of side content to explore. Most caves are technically optional, though I never wanted to avoid them. Finding a new cave was always extremely exciting. I personally went for 100% completion when it came to castaways and treasures, being able to read the fun descriptions, of which you get 3 each, written by members of the cast of all the treasures in the Piclopedia, was incentive enough to get them all. But there's also Dandori challenges, small little pre-built areas designed to test your management skills to the max with a time limit and a goal, ranging from defeating all enemies to collecting all treasure, and just to give you even more to do, a completely optional in-game spiritual remake of the first Pikmin game, which you play as Olimar, utilizing Pikmin in shorter days with a 30-day time limit to collect all parts of his ship. Even without this was going to make top 10, but providing an extra challenge for people that's completely optional is certainly appreciated. I won't complain about more gameplay that's this addicting. And then after beating that, it unlocks 10 extra difficult Dandori challenges that will put your skills to the full test to unlock some great rewards. During the course of the game, you'll also occasionally enter some CPU-based Dandori battles, which teach you the multiplayer of this game. I don't know if I necessarily needed them in the main story, but it's nice to have an option for multiplayer. All in all, Pikmin 4 was a huge surprise for me. I did not expect to get as into it as I did, but once I picked it up, I didn't want to put it down. So let's figure out a score. Gameplay is getting a 10. For some people it might not be this high, considering the amount of times you'll be spamming the A button to chuck as many Pikmin as possible, but there is a strategy to it when dealing with enemy creatures. It's not an end-all foolproof plan, and knowing what Pikmin to use is the key. Story is the usual for gameplay first Nintendo titles, serviceable but nothing amazing. I'll give it a 6 though, because there was a light twist at the ending I did not see coming. Graphics net a 10. I love the look of this game, it just feels so good to look at. Hero's Hideaway was my favorite level from a visual perspective for Pikmin lovers that are watching. Sound design is an 8. While the music isn't super memorable, it fits its tone well, and shockingly the sounds of the Pikmin, whistle, and such never really got old. Side content is once again netting a rock Pikmin, solid 10. There's so much to do and it always keeps it interesting between the challenges, caves, tower defense missions, and Olimar's shipwreck tale. Replayability is an 8, I definitely wouldn't mind going back in to improve my Dandori skills in the future. Goal for the next playthrough, when it happens, is to knock my playthrough down by at least 20 in-game days. Level design is a 9. All of the environments are perfectly crafted so that figuring out how to transport everything and how to manage your time is a brilliant puzzle when it easily could have been an exercise in frustration. Pikmin 4 takes home a mighty 61 out of 70. Now that we've scored it, I only have 3 notes for the Pikmin 5 devs. 1. Next time, don't underutilize Rock Pikmin. 2. Bring Ochi back because he's the best boy in gaming. 3. Please let Louie get eaten by a smoky prog. Fear is such an odd and fascinating emotion. It's the mind's natural defense mechanism to preserve itself in dangerous situations, and walks hand in hand with anxiety and stress to push you towards making the right choices in the most dire of circumstances. And yet we as a society, as a collective, have also deemed horror and fear to be something fun, be it through dressing up as a monster for Halloween, watching your favorite horror flick with your friends, or playing a game intended to make you scream. Why is that? I've always wondered. I never quite got the appeal of being scared until I was older, only dipping my toes in the subject as a kid. And I think I've found the piece of media that finally clicked with me in the form of a remake that people were very worried about. I've got a bit of a confession to make. Not only is this my first trip through Resident Evil 4, it's my first Resident Evil game, period. So while I'm not exactly the most qualified to compare to the franchise's other entries, and my horror game knowledge is a bit scarcer than other genres, I left my time with Resi 4 Remake wanting more, shockingly enough. I realize that it may not be the scariest game on the market, but it definitely has more than its fair share of scares and unease to go around, despite its memorable cast of characters frequently lightening the mood. I still felt glued to the edge of my seat with every moment I played. But let's talk about those characters real quick, why don't we? Our leading man, Leon S. Kennedy. I knew he was popular, but I finally understand why. He's a complete badass, and also a goober. He's the kind of guy to kick some serious ass but then drop a cheesy one-liner, but it doesn't come off as cringe. Ada's femme fatale energy is great, but it's obvious that she does care for Leon despite it all. I'm aware of Ashley's reputation from the original game, but her AI seems to be vastly improved, listening to most commands without issue, and while she's no badass herself, she seems like a genuinely sweet girl who appreciates Leon's help, and vice versa. I really like their dynamic. As for Capcom characters-wise, I'd be remiss to mention this last one. Friendship ended with Frank West and Phoenix Wright, now Resident Evil 4 Merchant is my best friend. Despite being a relatively creepy guy, the amount of relief I felt every time he popped up was unprecedented. The story is definitely as full of twists and turns as I expected it to based on what I've heard over the years. Leon is sent to a remote Spanish village in order to rescue the daughter of the United States president who has been kidnapped, but ends up involved in a plot involving a crazy religious cult and a species of horrific parasites called Las Plagas, to which the two very clearly have some sort of connection. Finding himself and Ashley infected with these monsters, and having some disturbing visions of the cult's leader, the two must find their way through the village, forests, and even a castle and remote island in order to cure themselves, unravel the plot, and get out safely. It's a thrilling tale, made all the more thrilling by the people and creatures you'll encounter along the way. Resi 4 is just as much an action game as it is a horror game, and while there is plenty of fear and body horror to be had, you've got the tools to handle it right by your side, or can find it along the way. Your selection of guns and your trusty knife. But in order to keep it scary, ammo is notably something that's very limited. Once you're out, you'll have to either search for more, craft some more using materials you pick up, or hope the enemies you take out drop something. While there are many fights in this game, and you definitely can feel stressed out when you're running low, as long as you're smart and your aim is decent, you'll be just fine. Speaking of limitations, the genius factor that everyone and their mother has mentioned when it comes to this game is the briefcase storage system. You've only got so much space you can carry with you, and your guns, ammo, crafting tools, healing items, they all eat up some of that precious space. So you've got to find a way in your case to maximize what you have, or you're leaving some stuff either behind on the scene or with your off-screen inventory and can only pick it up at designated locations, which are perfectly spaced apart to keep backtracking minimal, but to make sure you have to be smart with your usage of everything. The cream of the crop of Resi 4, however, is by far its combat. Dealing with enemies makes you feel awesome. Between the extremely satisfying gunshot sounds and explosions from your tools, to the sick new parry that Leon can do with his trusty knife, to knocking enemies back into the ground with the perfectly animated roundhouse kick, everything you do makes you want to keep going to finish this mission once and for all. And thanks to the merchant, you have a lot of freedom to prioritize the weapons you find the most fun. While I generally stuck to the handgun and shotgun for most of my playthrough, every weapon did come in handy, and being able to consistently up the weapon's ammo count, damage, and the like kept me constantly hooked with turning the tides from a horrific incident into my own power fantasy. That said, there are a few moments and enemies I definitely was not a fan of. The Chainsaw Ganado in particular I always just felt annoyed by when he showed up, since he's got an instant kill attack. I mean, it makes sense, but it felt extremely annoying to fight him due to the fact he can also block attacks. I was constantly trying to back up while fighting him, and when I entered an area where I knew there was one, I'd switch to stealth mode to take out other enemies to avoid dealing with them all at once, though to be fair, I did this throughout a lot of my playthrough. I also really hated one specific room in the castle that had tons of cultists that just spawn more, as well as two enemies that deal tons of damage but rely on sound to find you, though unfortunately, with loud guns, that's not very avoidable. Dealing with both simultaneously was an exercise in frustration. The boss fights were also an overall mixed bag. I liked most of them, but the encounter with the lake monster Del Lago and the final encounter with Krauser did offer some frustration for me. I really liked the use of sound in this game. It was by far the aspect the game needed to nail the most, and it absolutely did. From the disgusting noises the Plagas-infected enemies made, to the ringing of your shots in the cold night, to the stellar, haunting, or intensive music that made you never truly feel safe, outside of hanging around my bestie the merchant, it always kept my heart beating just a bit faster than normal. And those gunshot noises are best appreciated in the super fun shooting gallery minigame. I could literally keep playing this all day. Unlimited ammo for you to enjoy just popping shots and improving your aim against cardboard cutout pirates, with even some nice prizes offering some small passive buffs for you for proving your mettle with your different weapons. It's great. And when you get the chance to enter with a companion like Ashley, their commentary about how well you're doing or did helps keep the immersion alive and helps you feel just a bit better about the situation you find yourself in. So, what score is this one getting? Gameplay is a 9. The only reason I didn't give it a 10 is due to some rather frustrating encounters, the Chainsaw Sisters and the Twin Garradors being the worst offenders in my eyes. Story's a rock solid 10, not that I expected anything else. I really enjoyed learning the twisted lore of this land and its inhabitants, as well as taking on these monsters and getting Ashley home safe and sound. Sound design nets a perfect 10 as well. The atmosphere was this game's strongest suit, and I was constantly on edge. Level design is an 8.5, I liked the overall layout of most of the game's areas, never really got lost despite the massive environments, and the puzzles never felt too hard and offered a nice change of pace to the action. Side content is a 7. There are some requests you can pick up throughout the game to do specific things that are off the beaten path for some rewards, and the shootout gallery game is just that much fun to play. It didn't factor into my ranking, nor have I played it, but there is a free DLC mode, The Mercenaries, which anyone can install to enjoy. The graphics are a 10, the horrific monster designs have never looked more unappealing, and that's exactly what you want with body horror. Meanwhile, the environment itself feels very real for the most part. Replayability, I'm going to grant a 6.5 on virtue of the fact that while the game is rather long, there's definitely merit in going back to see how fast you can do it, or with different challenge runs, and the core gameplay itself is fun enough to warrant a revisit in the future. Resident Evil 4 Remake takes a 61 out of 70 possible points.
Can you believe this shit, Vertigo? That Kennedy bastard called me a virgin incel cock. I don't even know what that means.
Licensed games often get a bad rap. Despite the fact that it's been over a decade since the console's discontinuation, we've never quite escaped the stigma that the Wii and DS era gave us, that most licensed games are shovelware and not worth your time. And don't get me wrong, these games still exist, be they the shovelware put out by Game Mill Entertainment, games with a huge budget allocated into the wrong parts like Gollum, or games that could have been great if they just focused on making a good game, Disney Speedstorm. But licensed games aren't your E.T.s and Superman 64s anymore. Insomniac's great take on the Marvel Universe, the exciting slugfest that is Shredder's Revenge, and even the remake of Battle for Bikini Bottom from a few years ago have shown that you can do something special with love for the IP you're adapting. Need I even bring up that the Witcher games are actually a licensed IP? So, when I found out that one of my favorite series was getting a big budget title years ago in a state of play, the series that was my first fandom that helped me come out of my shell, I was ecstatic, despite the increasingly negative perspective around the IP and its creator. Alright, let's get the most important information out now. J.K. Rowling is terrible. Warner Brothers is also terrible. If you don't personally feel comfortable supporting the creator and IP holder, that is absolutely valid, and there are methods to engage with the franchise without monetarily supporting them, or if you so choose, to ignore them. Honestly, it might be the best method at making them upset. If you don't want to hear about this game, here's a timestamp to the next entry. But let's try and keep it civil in the comments. No one should ever be harassed over wanting to play a video game. So, I think our first and most obvious place to start out with this game is its story. You play as a young witch or wizard prepared to attend Hogwarts, beginning as a 5th-year student, a rare thing indeed. As you make your way to the school, you find yourself traveling through a secret passage through Gringotts Bank, finding some stone statues brought to life. It seems to be connected to the fact that you can see traces of ancient magic, or at least that's what is theorized by Professor Fig, a teacher and comrade in the game. Once you finally get to the school and choose your house, which can, alongside your canon wand, be imported from official sources, you will start attending classes, learning spells, and exploring Hogwarts and the glens and forests surrounding it, and making friends with some fellow students, all while you begin to search for the truth as to why you can see these traces, and facing off against an army of a violent goblin leader trying to do the same. The fellow students you'll be working with each have their own side stories you get to participate in. Natsai Onai from Gryffindor, Poppy Sweeting from Hufflepuff, and Sebastian Sallow from Slytherin. I guess they didn't have time to develop a proper companion for Ravenclaw. These students will join you for their side story missions, and I absolutely loved learning about each one's past. All 3 have great writing, and you feel like genuine friends as you spend time with them and see their quest through to the end. Sebastian especially gets a lot of care, and has one of the most engaging and interesting stories in the whole franchise. And while not directly connected to the story itself, the aspect that makes me, as a Potterhead, so excited is the attention to detail to the lore. Around every corner of the faithfully recreated Hogwarts castle is an Easter egg or reference to something, sometimes to things as large as the Goblet of Fire, to small things only the most die-hard of fans would recognize. And on top of that, Avalanche even added a healthy amount of their own lore, and yet it doesn't feel like fanfiction. There are no needless retcons or convoluted explanations here. It's an expansion of the rich lore that makes me still love this series to this day. Say what you will about the actual quality of the writing in the main series, world building is absolutely one of this series' strong suits, and the game takes full advantage of that. And as a bonus, it's canon, including all aspects that a certain someone would hate. Good on you, Avalanche, for giving the series more respect than the owner and creator have had in years. Definitely the part I most appreciated in this game. Which leads us into the gameplay. I do think overall the gameplay is a lot of fun, but there's not a huge scope of depth to it. It kind of plays like a Souls game but much easier. You gain access to a hefty volume of spells that are organized into different categories. You have your basic spells that are for use whenever and wherever you want them, including your basic attack spell, a spell that turns you invisible, an unlocking spell that can be upgraded, and spells to both create a light in dark areas and repair broken objects. Then there's force spells, which displace opponents you are fighting, damage spells designed for the heavy lifting while fighting, and control spells designed to temporarily take enemies out of the fight. You can also, should you choose to do so, learn the 3 unforgivable curses, which are powerful in combat but may offer a moral quandary depending on how you choose to roleplay your character. All non-essential spells have different cooldowns, so they can't just be spammed constantly, and some enemies will utilize shields that resist all but one specific type of spell, so you'll need to be careful about the spells you bring into battle and when to use them. So you can set up to 4 pre-built loadouts of 4 spells each, meaning you can have access to up to 16 special spells available at any time. I will say, however, despite this depth and the depth of the abilities your character unlocks through their ancient magic attunement, the variety of enemies is a little small to utilize them against, with only about 8 different types of enemies each, with a handful of subtypes. With all the lore in the wizarding world, I would have liked to see some other creatures make themselves known, including some more obscure stuff. There are other creatures that inhabit the world that are more friendly, however, creatures that can be caught and raised inside vivariums in the Room of Requirement, and you can even breed them, though this too I would have liked to have seen expanded on. And I think that's my biggest problem with the game. It is a fantastic base, but could use some more flavor with more enemy types, creatures to collect, and the ability to repeat some of the fantastically fun mini-games. There's Summoner's Court, a game utilizing the summoning charm to move balls to different areas for points. It's kinda like reverse curling. Crossed Wands is a dueling club where you duel with fellow students in a tournament setting. Broom Trials, which have you flying different courses on your broom. But of these 3 minigames, only the Broom Trials can be repeated for better times. Once you beat an opponent in Summoner's Court, they won't play with you again. And once you become champion of the dueling club, there's no more brackets, which is a damn shame. There are a lot of side activities outside of these and plenty of optional side quests. Merlin Trials tend to involve platforming or puzzle solving, which can be fun. Battle arenas put you through a gauntlet of foes, and there are many caves with treasure and puzzles to solve. Hogwarts Legacy is at its best when dungeon crawling or exploring the castle itself, or just breezing around the countryside looking for caves to explore. The soundtrack is phenomenal, featuring music that calls back to the score that John Williams made for the films, while going in its own direction. It's got a very cinematic feel to it that helps you really feel like you're a part of this world. So let's take a crack at scoring it. I'll give the graphics a 10, the art style looks very nice, and especially the look of the castle itself, and the design of Hogsmeade and the creatures that inhabit the world make it a treat to look at. Sound design gets a 9, while the music is once again not super memorable on its own, it is a huge part of the game's atmosphere and identity, and without it, it would not be complete. Story is a 10, if nothing else because it's a paradise of something new that isn't the Fantastic Beasts films that came out after the first, or The Cursed Child, which we don't talk about. It actually respects the foundation of the original series and their lore, and tells a gripping narrative and remaining genuine, rather than the awful cash grabs of the last several years, though the overall narrative is great too. Gameplay is a 7. There's a lot of variety which I like, but the core loop I can definitely see getting old for people who just want to reach the ending of the main story. Level design is a 9.5, a few of the dungeons gave me some mild trouble, but overall I think the puzzles are well designed, and I would give it a 10 if I could just judge it on the recreation of the iconic school itself. Side content, likewise, gets a 9.5, between taking out infamous named foes, to the side stories of your classmates, to the puzzles and mini-games, there's a lot to get out of if you want to take the time, and plenty of side quests outside of your classmates as well, with lots of people to help and rewards to be had. And if you're the creative type, the Room of Requirement is yours to decorate however you so choose. Replayability, I'm going to have to give a 6. While the main story and gameplay are fun enough to warrant me coming back in the future, I do wish there were more than one unique questline per house to warrant revisiting the story. It's cool that each house has something different, but I'd like more than just one quest doing so. So, all that in mind, Hogwarts Legacy takes home a 61 out of 70. For a first outing, I think this did a great job of showing that the franchise still has steam and can be good when placed in the right hands, which are hilariously not those of the creator. That said, even as a massive fan of the IP to this very day, there's a lot of improvements I'd like to see in a sequel. For one, being able to play Quidditch. though admittedly I understand the rules of the game itself might make it difficult to adapt into a fun and dynamic style in a video game format. Tournament brackets for the Dueling Club, more of an emphasis on the actual classes since they aren't used too much in the actual game, a mini-game for each class that unlocks rewards and breaks up the gameplay would go a long way, as well as a larger bestiary of enemies to fight and friendly creatures to catch and raise would make the sequel even better. For now though, I'll say that if you're a huge fan of the IP, you're going to get a lot out of this game, but for those who are looking at it purely from a gameplay perspective and nothing else, maybe skip this one. Or if you're on the fence about it for any reason, there's the possibility it might come to Game Pass at some point, or you can ask to borrow a copy from a friend, or, you know. It's your choice to play or not to play.
Coward! Fight me fairly!
Imperio!
Justice!
Confredo! Places!
Superheroes. Who doesn't love them? From a young age, I was always a fan of the costume-clad champions of justice and their unyielding resolve to fight for what's right against all odds. Starting as a huge vintage Superman fan at around 7 or so, then changing into a Batman fan around 12 when I discovered the peak content that is Batman the Animated Series, evolving into an all-Justice League fan with that show, to eventually getting deeply invested into Marvel's comics line, and eventually the MCU in its first 3 phases, when there were more hits than misses, to even my first real foray into the world of anime with My Hero Academia, I'd say that this is one of the few constants that stuck by me all these years. And yet, despite it all, there was always one hero that I flip-flop back and forth on: Spider-Man. When I was younger, I thought Spidey was cool, of course, but I always saw him as a bit overrated. And to be frankly honest, I do think that still, at least in regards to the Tobey Maguire movies. They aren't bad, in fact I'd say they're quite good, but they're not my favorite incarnations of the webhead. I didn't really understand how essential he was to the verse until the first incarnations of the MCU had no mention of him. And then, he showed up in Civil War, and it all clicked for me, especially after checking out the first Spider-Verse film. And now I can confidently say, without a doubt, that Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. Characters like Hulk, Superman, and Iron Man are power fantasies, Batman to an extent as well, though he's also the fantasy of what the peak human mind and body could do, but Spidey's just built different. And it doesn't matter if it's Peter, Miles, Miguel, Gwen, Penny, whoever. Spider-Man is the pinnacle example of a superhero's humanity, for all the good and bad that represents. He's deeply flawed, he makes rash decisions, he tries to balance the two halves of his life, and it has disastrous consequences for him. Even when he picks a side to prioritize, the other side of his life suffers, all harkening back to Uncle Ben's words. So, what does it feel like stepping into Spidey's shoes? Insomniac did a great job with the first game, following it up with a banger spin-off, then did it all over one more time just for good measure. Just moving around in these games feels amazing. It's hard to describe, but when I play these games, it feels like I'm actually there in a way. The smoothness of swinging through the city or zipping around the environment dealing with baddies is immensely satisfying, and it comes hand in hand with the absolutely stellar soundtrack that, just like Hogwarts Legacy, invokes the feeling of playing out the role of your hero in a movie. Cinematic audio for the win. Of course, it wouldn't be Spidey without the sounds of criminals' faces and bones taking fat L's, all with a good quip or two, and the voice cast nails the performance. These are some of my favorite takes on all these characters. Miles, MJ, Harry, and especially Yuri Lowenthal's Peter knock it out of the park here, especially once Peter gets a hold of the symbiote suit and it starts to affect his mind, making him more aggressive and his voice more gravelly. So, what are you doing in the game outside of busting criminal jaws? Well, you've got a nice variety of different mission types, including research for the Foundation Pete ends up working for that involve different minigames to break up the action, lots of combat challenges with the goons of Kraven the Hunter and a mysterious cult, lots of collectibles to find that call back to the 60 plus years of Spidey's history, and of course, just helping out people around the city, which are honestly my favorite parts. There's 2 missions in particular that come back to that human aspect of Spider-Man. Without taking off the mask, Peter or Miles help out 2 sets of people with just their simple personal problems, and in my favorite part of both missions, they just sit and talk with them, musing about life and love and things like that. One of them made me cry. If you have played the game, you know exactly the 2 missions I'm talking about. Both Peter and Miles have specific missions only they can do, be they story related or side quests. Only Peter can solve the Foundation quests and look into the cult, while only Miles can find the Prowler's stash of tech and complete Mysterio challenges, so neither Spider-Man feels like they're eating up too much screen time, and both of them have character arcs. They make an effort to differentiate the 2 even further. Miles can do everything base Peter can do and more, but only Peter gets access to the symbiote suit and the powers it grants. As a really cool extra, both of them get access to a myriad of suits, with some even alternate color designs as well, just for leveling up and completing missions, so you can dress fly whenever you want to go. There's some really cool gameplay changes to innovate from the first as well. Both Peter and Miles get the web wings, giving even more mobility options that need to be combined with swinging to complete challenges and reach some destinations. There's a new web launch ability that can be used in some areas that give you a nice starting launch, and both of them now have additional flashy damage options with different utilities, like knocking enemies around for when you get surrounded, and from time to time when fighting baddies, a friend may even show up to help take them down. There are 2 Spideys after all, it's only natural they'd cross paths from time to time in their crime-fighting quests, but there are other vigilantes too who may also show up to help out. The selection of villains this time around isn't quite as strong as the first game, in my opinion. Sandman makes a great opening set piece, Lizard is a great boss fight, Mysterio was a fun surprise, and Kraven plays a big role in the story, but it's all meant as build-up for the big bad, Venom. Which, as my favorite villain in Spidey's Rogues Gallery, is awesome, but it's not quite as strong of a setup as the Sinister Six in the first game. I was kind of hoping that Goblin would show up at some point as well, but I suppose they're saving the last of his arch-nemeses for a 3rd game. The boss fights are all very solid though. There's a certain fight where you're playing as Miles that is just absolute peak. Same with Peter, actually. Those who've played know what 2 I'm talking about. There's a boost in enemy variety this time around as well, with more than just humans to fight, and I'm glad they did this, though I do kind of wish they would have brought back remnants of the demons from the first game for a little more variety. The city is even bigger than it was the first go-around, and not only does Manhattan return in its entirety, but Queens is brought into the mix as well and offers an environment very different for your crime fighting, and the environment itself is just as great looking as the first time. And with the Mysterio challenges and the more varied locales of Queens, I'd arguably say the visual variety, at least, is much appreciated. I can't quite say the same about the character models though. MJ, Pete, Norman, Harry, and Miles all look a bit off in comparison to the first game, in my opinion. They're not bad, I would say, but it feels like they tried a little too hard to make them look more real, and just ended up pushing them into the uncanny valley. One last thing before I score it, there are a lot of points in the game where you get to break up the gameplay and just play as someone that isn't Spider-Man, and I actually really appreciate that. I know people were mixed on the MJ segments in the first game, but simply by giving her something to fight back with, even if it's not overtly powerful, made her segments a lot more fun and bearable. There's even a segment where you get to play as Haley, Miles' crush, and it's a really cool, if short, mission that's about helping your community. It must have been hard balancing all the personalities in this game around and giving each of them a reason to be there. Harry, Genki, MJ, Peter, Miles, and all the villains. None of them seem out of place, and most of them get satisfying character arcs, especially for Miles. Though I will say that Pete's feels incomplete. I guess they're wanting to go one more around with Spider-Man in the future, or maybe as part of a DLC campaign like the first one. So, what's the score for Spider-Man 2? Story gets a 9, I think the narrative is very satisfying, and I'm glad to see that they're committed to ensuring a rich narrative that takes the best from the webhead's history and avoids some of the pitfalls he's taken along the way. Thank God there's no Paul in sight. Graphics get an 8, While the environments themselves are great, I'm taken a little out of the immersion with the uncanny faces. I'd kind of like a mod to return them to their appearance from the first game, but it wouldn't be rigged properly, so it is what it is. Sound design nets at 10, even though it is another example of atmospheric music, the score is still perfect for what it needs to be, and Earthgang's song Swing nets at this high of a spot. Gameplay nets an 8, it's almost everything that made the first game great and some more, though I can't believe I'm about to say this, I actually kinda miss Screwball's challenges. She's not like the best villain, but I did think the challenges themselves were fun. I know that's a bit of a spicy take, but it's the honest truth. I do think that some more boss encounters would have been very nice, especially since they tease something with a very famous Spidey villain, but there isn't much of a payoff this time. Replayability is a 9, with a few more boss fights it would have netted a higher score, but the core movement and fluidity of the combat just feels good whenever you play, so I'm more than happy to just pop in and swing around for a bit, fight a few battles, and I'm done. Level design is a 10. I mean, it was amazing that they even made a fully functional, living, breathing Manhattan in the first game, and now there's even more. Truly a superior, spectacular job from Insomniac. Side content grabs an 8 because I would have liked some more variety in the mission types, but there is a lot to do, and those missions where you're just helping out the people of NYC are phenomenal. Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 swings into its 7th place spot with a strong 63 out of 70. Between these great games and the amazing work of the Spider-Verse films, I've never been more proud to be a Spider-Man fan. That said, let's let the Chad artists, animators, and sound team take their sweet time on Beyond the Spider-Verse, alright? This and the first 2 films will keep me happy for quite some time. It certainly isn't the comics at the moment.
You flinch from the bottle, Paul.
Who is the most popular now?
Paul, you have to marry your mother-in-law if you flinch that.
Let's not kid ourselves, the reason that Spider-Man 2 made only 7th on my list is pretty obvious. As great of a time as I had playing it, it is very similar to the first game both in tone and gameplay style, and for some people, they don't need huge amounts of innovation. There's nothing wrong with that. That said, when I get a sequel to a game that I love, I often find myself being more critical of it. It can't just be the same thing again, because capturing lightning in a bottle just once is hard enough, let alone twice in a row. Innovation eventually must come, or else you risk your series becoming samey. The new Super Mario Bros. And Pokemon games definitely have made that known, which is why Wonder and Cassette Beasts managed to show them up so hard. But if you are starting with a very solid base, your innovation doesn't need to be too great, a fact proven by the fact Spider-Man 2 managed to easily claim a spot in the top 10, and immediately made even clearer by this next entry. And at last we reach one of the most obvious contenders for this list. Yes, Tears of the Kingdom is just as amazing as everyone says it is. Everything that made Breath of the Wild work is once again here, and more. Though, if I can make an extremely weird recommendation, if you somehow have not played Breath of the Wild by this point, you're better off just grabbing Tears of the Kingdom. Continuity is basically thrown out the window. Objectively speaking, it is a sequel, but basically none of the denizens of Hyrule recognize Link, despite the fact they clearly should. A few key characters do, the ones that were absolutely essential to the plot of the first game, but outside of that, you're treated like a stranger. It's a really weird decision, probably designed to make it more approachable to new players, but as someone who finished every side quest in the first game, it's weird, and I don't really like it. The sense of wonder that I had engrossing myself in the 300 plus hours I played the first game back on the Wii U can't be recreated, so I would have at least liked to feel the contributions I made to Hyrule meant something, but it is the way it is. Also, for some reason, the GOAT Cass is just not here, which makes me sad because he was my favorite NPC. Your story begins with Link and Zelda, sporting a cute new haircut, exploring the underground caverns of Hyrule Castle in an effort to try and combat the mysterious gloom that has been threatening the kingdom lately, eventually stumbling across the decomposing corpse of the Demon King himself, Ganondorf, who returns to life and attacks, destroying the Master Sword and sending Zelda tumbling off a cliff and Link without a fucking arm. Holy shit, is that Matt Mercer's voice coming out of Ganondorf?
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for! That's what it's all about!
Link finds himself on a massive floating island in the sky, his arm having been replaced by one he does not recognize, and gameplay begins. You make your way to a massive temple, finding the spirit of the first king of Hyrule, Rauru, who explains the arm used to belong to him and is imbued with powers that you must unlock, the replacement for the Sheikah Slate abilities, and I would actually say that outside of really missing Bomb, these abilities are much more useful. Using Recall allows you to reverse time on an object, helping to solve puzzles, get yourself to places you wouldn't otherwise be able to, and even return enemy projectiles right back to their stupid faces. Ascend is my favorite, allowing you to dive into the ceiling itself above you and swim through solid objects to reach much higher places. It cuts down on some of the hassle of climbing, but can't be used without a ceiling above you, so it never makes exploration too easy. Ultra Hand, a cheeky reference to a toy Nintendo produced before they made video games, allows you to pick up different objects in the environment freely and move them around, allowing you to manipulate your battles in fun and creative ways, even better than in Breath of the Wild. You can also use Ultra Hand to position objects in specific ways and essentially glue them together to create different objects, like stairs, boats, and more. Lastly, Fuse allows you to utilize objects from your environment and rewards from battle like monster parts to amplify your weaponry and make them hit harder, depending on what you fuse to them. You can fuse a beehive to a sword and make bees attack enemies when you hit with it, and that's the greatest thing I've ever seen. Ultra Hand is what you'll make the most use of throughout your journey, as you can use it in tandem with Zonai devices, ancient technology with all kinds of uses, from wheels to flamethrowers to little drones, fans, and even steering sticks. In this game, you can build vehicles and even equivocally mecha to help fight battles for you out of stuff you find in the overworld. Your only limits are your imagination, and from a gameplay perspective, that's kind of all the important new stuff to discuss. You have all the same tools of the trade from the first game to help save the kingdom. So, let's talk level design. As much as I did like the previous game, I've always been a bit iffy on the Divine Beasts. They were fine, but the puzzles felt kind of samey in each one, and I will admit the gimmick of moving the entire dungeon was fun the first time. 4 more times after that, I can safely say I checked out and did them out of obligation. But this time around, I actually think I quite liked the dungeons of this game, or at least 3 of them. I appreciated the more traditional take on puzzles and such, and part of the charm this time was just getting to them. I mean it when I say that the ascent up a series of flying ships and platforms higher and higher into the sky, always afraid I might fall off, was an unforgettable experience, and it led up to one of my favorite boss fights of all time in a loving tribute to the Wind Waker, Colgera. An evolution on Mulgera, you'll duel this flying monster in the middle of an icy tornado, permanently riding the wind while you either try to pepper the beast's weak point with arrows or get above it and dive through its frozen segments, all set to an absolutely stunning boss theme that calls back to both the flight to land on Va Meadow in the previous game, as well as a gorgeous incarnation of the Dragon Roost Island music from Wind Waker, which is, of course, also the basis for Rito Village's theme, but this has a less airy and more heroic feeling. Just give it a listen.
And everything was lovely once again.
wonderful.
While I wouldn't quantify any of the later dungeons as perfect as this one felt to me, I can safely say that I both really loved the Goron dungeon, being an old abandoned mining city with carts and tracks, having to reach it by diving into Death Mountain itself, and the Lightning Temple having you go full Tomb Raider, entering a massive pyramid through the catacombs with a lot of verticality, and the puzzles of the dungeon being interconnected is just mwah, chef's kiss. The only dungeon I didn't particularly care for was the Water Temple, as getting there felt a bit of a rehash of the Wind Temple, and the puzzles were less interesting. It also had the worst boss of the bunch. The story, I would actually argue, is better than the previous game. However, the method of earning the memories this time, which are actually Zelda's rather than Link's, should have had a set order to be done in, as the format tells one continuous story rather than a series of loosely connected events. I even put together the twists long before the story ended up getting revealed, but I do overall prefer the stakes and twist of this story as a whole. It got to me emotionally. I do think that the characters as a whole are a bit weaker this time around. The new sages don't have quite the same charisma as the 4 champions from before, though Riju, Sidon, and Tulin are all fun to have around. The theme of this game is community. Whereas the first game was about a fractured and isolated Hyrule, this one deals heavily with its characters, which I think is to its benefit. You'll always have a friend around here, even if they're just with you in spirit. Your friends actively help you through dungeons and in boss battles throughout the whole game. Hyrule has never been more friendly. That said, did we need the same cutscene with the same dialogue as each sage awakens? You could have used this as the memory replacement and had each one explain a little bit more. I digress. Hyrule in this game is huge. In addition to the first game's map, with some changes based on the events of the story, you've got islands in the sky to explore, and an entire second map beneath the surface, the Depths, which are much more dangerous to explore, but contain many great treasures beneath. The scope of increasing everything extends to enemy variety too. While in the first game there were only about 14 different enemy species, there are 21 different ones this time, including every variety from the first game except Guardians, and combined with the much more interesting boss designs of this game, I never got bored in combat here fighting the same types of enemies. Shrines return, without a huge overhaul, though this time they're often focused on utilizing the various Zonai technology for puzzle solving, which leads to a lot more interesting puzzles than the first game, in my opinion. I haven't yet finished every shrine, but I want to go back in and do so. The sound design is roughly the same as its predecessor, often favoring very light musical motifs as opposed to giving each area a unique and iconic track. I don't hate this choice, and I think it works well, though I prefer having more great tracks to listen to as opposed to ambiance. The town and boss themes more than make up for it, though. Last thing we gotta talk about, the man, the myth, the legend, Ganondorf himself. This is my favorite incarnation of him, and no, it's not just because he's voiced by the GOAT Matt Mercer. This is the most intimidating he's ever been to me. Before he pulls a battle for Bikini Bottom and gets rehydrated, his zombie-like visage is genuinely freaky, and when he does finally turn to his rightful form, then to the Demon King, and his health bar just keeps growing, and then he freaking uses the Flurry Rush maneuver on you like you've been doing the whole game, it's peak boss design, and my jaw hit the floor when I first saw it. Giving the villain protagonist only powers always makes them stand out even more, makes you feel like they're on the same level as you. This also feels like one of the most evil Ganondorfs too. No noble pursuit for his people's well-being to be found here, just pure ambition and lust for power, and willing to murder on screen to make his dream a reality. I know plenty of villains do this, but for a Nintendo game, it's definitely a welcome surprise to just let him be a complete bastard. Even his final act is an attempt at giving Link a final fuck you. I won't spoil it, but holy shit, it is a cool set piece. And it leads the game to one final full circle, as you reach out to catch Zelda, diving through the sky. Link failed to catch her at the start, but he refuses to fail this time, as a beautiful rendition of the game's main theme, interspersed with both the main theme of the series and Zelda's lullaby, plays in the background. It's something special as a longtime fan of this series. So, how do I score it? Story is an 8, it's not as deep as it could have been, and the format in which it presents it is not the best, but the characters and the twist make it something special. Gameplay is a 10, it's Breath of the Wild plus more, you're adding something great to something great here. Sound design nets an 8. No, 9, just on the virtue of Colgera's theme and that final theme while diving for Zelda. Graphics will take home an 8, the cel-shaded look remains gorgeous, but it doesn't innovate on its predecessor, which it could have looked better, in my opinion. Level design is a 9.5. I would give it a 10, though I think the depths were a bit too big, and I was hoping for more of the Sky Islands. The dungeons are good though, as are the puzzles, so I very rarely wasn't having fun, and I appreciate that the game mixed it up with the gameplay frequently. I miss my motorbike though. Side content is a 10, there's side quests galore, and if you're a completionist, the Korok seeds will keep you plenty busy. Replayability is a 9. The puzzles are still fun with many relying on the physics engine, and your creativity can be exercised with making weapons of mass destruction to mess with enemies all day long. Tears of the Kingdom takes home a mighty 63.5 out of 70. A word of warning for frame rate sticklers out there though. Most of the time it remains at 30, but there was a point it dropped to at least 15 in my playthrough, and even though I'm running on a launch year Switch, I don't think that can really be acceptable. It looks nice, but I'd prefer a slightly uglier game if it means it runs better. Breath of the Wild ran better on my Wii U. Overall, a gold standard experience. Link can make pizza, and I continue to see the Gloom Hands in my nightmares, so that's great.
You can run, but I'll still be in your nightmares!